I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge. Nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and maintained. Every now and then, someone in the family would enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the new year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to reach by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes, I started to feel the sense of relief I was hoping for. Time seemed to move slower out here, and there was nothing to crowd my mind. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grab more wood. When I opened the front door, I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods, with no signs of heading toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they have gotten way out here without a snowmobile? And why were they here to begin with? I was really confused, especially considering they had to have come up to the cabin during the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident. Not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. Leaving now would have made this trip feel like a huge waste. I sat by the fire and kept watch for the next couple of hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun rose higher and the temperature warmed up, I threw my jacket back on and decided to go for a walk in the woods to pass the time. I figured I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed the prints into the woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of footprints in the snow, winding through the woods. Then, I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked forward. It was eerily quiet, and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. But I knew what I had heard. The crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I realized someone was out there in front of me, likely hiding behind one of the trees. They had probably just noticed me and quickly hidden, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. Hello, is someone out there? There was no response, not even the slightest sound. The tension was suffocating. I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. Once there, I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin, or what might have happened, but I have no doubt that the person in the woods was the same one who came by in the middle of the night. The fact that they were on their way back to my cabin only confirmed that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin since. Every year, around the end of February, my good friend Justin and I take a camping trip to the same place. We both do a lot of backpacking and camping, but there's always something different and special about camping in a snowy forest with the right gear. It's not all that unsafe though. This year, we arrived, set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a couple of drinks around the flames. It wasn't long after we settled in that we suddenly heard something horrifying, a dark, piercing scream echoing across the landscape. It lasted only a few seconds, and then everything went quiet again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs, startled. The sound was too far away for us to see anything, but we instinctively looked in that direction anyway. Justin thought it must have been an animal making an eerily human sound because, as he put it, there's no way someone else is out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person, but either way, we didn't know what to do other than wait and see if it happened again. A while passed and nothing else happened. The sun began to set, and the temperature started dropping. We gathered more wood for the fire and cooked some food. But then, out of nowhere, that scream sounded again. This time, it was closer, maybe only 200 feet from our campsite. Justin and I exchanged uneasy glances, silently agreeing that we should check it out before the sun completely set. I grabbed my knife just in case, and we both bundled up before heading into the woods. We walked cautiously, unsure of what we were walking toward. After about 150 feet, we heard the scream again, this time from almost right next to us. I froze, staring in the direction of the sound. There was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and his face mirrored my worry. We stood still for nearly 5 minutes, just listening and waiting. Finally, Justin began slowly stepping forward again. He passed a few trees before suddenly stopping in his tracks. I could feel his fear radiating through his body language. I stepped up next to him, and the sight before us nearly made me throw up. A deer carcass lay in the snow, freshly killed. Blood stained the ground around it, and the sight was sickening. Then, Justin tapped my shoulder. I looked up, following his gaze, and saw a person standing across the forest. They were wearing hardly any winter clothing, just standing there, watching us. It was as if they were observing us, their presence unnerving and out of place. Justin tapped my shoulder harder this time, signaling me to leave. Without a word, we hurried back to our camp. We didn't speak as we packed our things as quickly as possible and left the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw, or who that person was, or even if they were the ones screaming. After that, we stopped going to our usual camping spot and chose a different area, hoping to never encounter something like that again. It was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries, hoping the holiday season would bring in some better tips. Around 11 p.m., I received an order. It seemed normal, just a bag of food to drop off in a house. Most of my previous orders that night were grocery deliveries, probably because stores were closing for the next 2 days. The address for this one was farther than I'd usually be willing to drive. With not many other orders coming through, I decided to take it anyway. It was lightly snowing outside, and the roads were very quiet, making the drive peaceful. The house, however, wasn't in an average neighborhood. When I arrived at what I thought was the neighborhood entrance, it turned out to be a thin path through the trees. At the end of the path was a small, cabin-like home. I drove down, parked, and got out with the food. Walking up to the door, I knocked a few times. Inside, I could hear chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like so many people, which confused me. How could that many people fit into such a small cabin? There was also something strange about the way it sounded. It didn't seem natural. Something felt off. Then the door opened. A man stood in front of me, and the contrast to what I expected threw me off for a second. The inside of the house was eerily still. Nobody was moving around, and most of the lights weren't even on. Yet, the sound of a large holiday party continued, seemingly coming from the small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me. "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I began stuttering, trying to decline and make up an excuse, but the man interrupted me. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while he was saying these strange, unsettling things, the chatter in the back of the cabin continued, until it suddenly stopped. Just like that, the cabin was silent. It was as if someone had turned off a recording or tape. The man turned to glance back, clearly not expecting that to happen. Before he could do or say anything else, I dropped the bag of food on the porch and bolted back to my car. I got in and drove away, my heart racing. That was the last delivery I did that night. I went home and stayed there for the rest of the holidays. I know nothing actually happened at that cabin, but the disturbingly strange atmosphere, the eerie details, and the thought of what asterisk could asterisk have happened still freaked me out. It was the day after Christmas, and I was working the overnight shift at a small family-owned grocery store as a stocker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled that night. The store had been closed for Christmas, and it was probably very slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do in terms of stocking. I spent the first hour feeling what little needed to be restocked on the shelves. After that, I just wandered around the store. As I was walking past the front, I noticed someone outside, unusually close to the building for this time of night. At first, it looked like he was just walking around, but he quickly noticed me looking at him. Instead of walking away, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything or knock. He just stood there, staring at me. I felt really uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked away from the window, trying to play it off like I wasn't bothered. But it was strange. No normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before going back to the front to check the window again. He was gone. I sighed in relief and continued wandering around the store to pass the time, weaving in and out of the aisles and tidying up the shelves. About 10 minutes later, I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles and immediately froze. Several boxes had fallen off the shelves and were scattered across the floor. These weren't small items that could have simply tipped over. They were larger boxes, and it was clear they had been deliberately knocked down. As I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, I heard something. From the end of the aisle came a soft, deep, and eerie laugh, like a man quietly giggling. It sounded almost unnatural, as if a grown adult was mimicking the laugh of a child. I considered confronting whoever was there, but then I remembered the man I'd seen outside the window. He was fairly large and could have had something hidden in his jacket. I decided not to take the risk. I ran to the front of the store, bolted out the doors, got into my car, and called the police. They arrived about 10 minutes later, but by then, the man inside the store was gone. When we reviewed the security tapes, we saw that he had entered the store through a side door. The footage showed him hiding behind the aisle, holding a small switchblade in his hand while he laughed at me. The police suspected he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree. But honestly, I don't think it changes anything. That night, I could have died if things had gone differently. I was never a big party person, but on big nights like these, I almost always got peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his place. He was kind of known as the rich friend because he had a big house with land and everything. My buddy Trav picked me up around 9 and we drove to the party. There were maybe 20 or 30 people there. Nothing too crazy, but enough to get me drinking more than I should have. We played some drinking games, watched the ball drop, and overall, it was a good time. Around 3 a.m., I was ready to leave, but I found Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. I figured he, along with probably everyone else, wasn't sober enough to drive. So, I went outside and ordered an Uber. The app said they were 10 minutes away. I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't really near any big roads. It was kind of away from everything, nice and quiet. It gave me a chance to relax after a night like that. I just sat there, curled up under my jacket, and waited. It felt like only 4 or 5 minutes when a car pulled up. Uber. The guy called out. I jumped up and got in, startled by how I'd lost track of time like that. I guess I really was wasted. I settled in the back seat. The driver started driving. He looked to be in his 50s, with short dark hair and a thick beard. "Big party tonight?" he asked. "Oh yeah, I guess so," I responded, though I wasn't much in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror, and something about the look he gave me made me uncomfortable. I didn't know why at the time. I just chalked it up to overthinking. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, trying to rest for the remainder of the ride. But a minute later, my phone dinged. I opened my eyes and immediately made eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. Awkwardly, I glanced away and pulled out my phone. My stomach tightened and my face went pale. It was a message from the Uber app. The text said the driver had just arrived at the pickup location, followed by another text from the driver asking where I was. I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were still locked on me. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back again, and closed my eyes, pretending I didn't know anything. Inside, I was panicking and terrified, but I tried to play it off. 30 seconds later, I felt the car slowing down. When I peeked out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. Halfway through getting out, the driver started moving again, which made me fall onto the pavement. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted away as fast as I could. He drove off without saying a word. I don't know who that man was, but it seems he was going around on New Year's night, picking up random drunk people waiting for Ubers. There were so many signs I missed, like the fact we weren't even heading in the direction of my home. I was just too out of it to think straight. Honestly, I should never have gotten in the car without checking my phone. Where he would have taken me, or what could have happened, is unknown. It was the first weekend of February. I was at home, enjoying my days off from work. Everything was pretty normal. But sometime in the middle of the day on Saturday, I thought I heard something from upstairs. It was a thud, just one. It wasn't very loud or alarming, but it was unfamiliar, which was the only reason I went up to see if I could figure out what it was. I didn't find anything though. I wasn't worried and hardly thought about it for the rest of the day. Hours later, as I was winding down for the night, sitting on the couch and barely keeping my eyes open, I heard another thud. It sounded almost identical to the first one. Again, I looked around and saw nothing. I'd even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was completely empty, and looked around, finding nothing unusual. I figured maybe it was an animal on the roof, or just the house settling and making strange noises. I went to bed that night without giving it much more thought. The next morning, I got up and went downstairs as usual to make coffee and breakfast. As I moved around the kitchen, something felt off. While preparing breakfast, it seemed like things had been moved. The cereal and chips in the pantry didn't look like they were where I'd left them. Obviously, I didn't purposefully memorize the exact order of everything, so I couldn't be certain. It was just a strange, unsettling feeling that something wasn't quite right. However, I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. The rest of that day went by uneventfully. I was downstairs watching TV and doing some chores. Then, just after sunset, I heard that same thud again. I stood up to check, like I had before. As I approached the stairs, I heard a faint click. It was very quiet, but it was unmistakably the sound of something clicking. I went to the top of the steps and listened for a moment before looking around my bedroom. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Then, I decided to check the spare bedroom, figuring I might as well take a look. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. The door was locked from the other side. Blood drained from my face, and my heart raced in sudden panic. I took a few shaky steps back, feeling like my legs were about to give out. Then, I heard movement behind the door. Someone was on the other side. Terrified, I bolted down the stairs. As I ran, I heard another click, followed by the creak of the door opening. I dashed out the front door and ran to the end of the street, where I called 911. When the police arrived and searched the house, they didn't find anyone. However, in the spare bedroom closet, they discovered grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been living there, at least for those 2 days, but possibly longer without me knowing. They were likely coming out at night while I was sleeping to eat, drink, and do whatever else they needed. The thought sends chills through me even now. Thankfully, it seems they left for good after that night. What they would have done if I had confronted them is something I never want to find out. I was staying inside for the night. It was extremely cold outside, with a heavy snowstorm sweeping through our town. I had the TV playing my comfort show and was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching outside my front door. The sound of boots crunching in the snow was loud enough to get my attention and wake me up. I looked at the door, but there was no knock. The footsteps stopped for a few seconds, and then I heard them take a couple more steps before suddenly going quiet. It sounded like whoever it was had stepped off the porch and into the snow, which I could no longer hear. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The snowstorm was worse than I'd thought. It was almost completely white outside, making it hard to see more than a few feet. Through the faint visibility, I could just barely make out shoe prints in the snow coming off the porch. Why had they just stepped off like that? And what were they even doing outside in weather like this? I couldn't come up with any answers. I checked the side and back windows for more shoe prints in case they had walked around the house, but I didn't see anything unusual. I went back to the couch and lay down, feeling uneasy. It was strange, but I didn't want to overreact. An hour or so went by with no further disturbances. The soft rumble of the snowstorm outside, combined with the low volume of the TV, made my eyes heavy. Slowly, I drifted back to sleep. When I eventually woke up, it was still pitch dark. The TV had switched to its timeout screen, showing it was 3 a.m. The snowstorm was still going strong, but something was different. It was much louder. The sound was unnervingly clear and crisp, as if the storm was no longer muffled by the windows. My eyes darted fully open, and I sat up. Reaching over, I turned on the lamp next to me and froze. Water spots dotted the floor, leading straight to the front door, which was wide open. Snow was pouring into the house, and boot prints were outlined in the water, trailing through the hallway. I squinted to make out the faint remains of the same boot prints leading back out of the house, but it wasn't clear. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom to call for help. When the police arrived, they discovered that whoever had broken in had already left. It seemed they had come in looking for something specific, and after not finding it, they simply walked back out into the blizzard. What truly terrified me, though, was the realization that while they were inside, they either didn't notice me lying on the couch or had somehow crept past me so quietly that they didn't wake me. Even now, the thought of it chills me to the core. I haven't had a good night's sleep since then, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, startled by every little creak or noise. It was just before Christmas. School was out, but my parents still worked during the day. Being an only child meant I had the whole house to myself and could do whatever I wanted while they were gone. It was just another weekday. I think it was Tuesday. My parents left for work at 9. As soon as they were gone, I fired up my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after they had left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and not used to answering the door alone, I decided to ignore it. I tried not to make too much noise, hoping whoever it was would think no one was home and just leave. I didn't hear any more knocks, so I went on with my day. I ended up gaming for way too long, probably 3 or 4 hours straight, before I finally got up to make some breakfast. I went downstairs, poured a bowl of cereal, and was heading back upstairs when I noticed something odd. The front door was unlocked. I thought that was weird because my parents always remembered to lock it, and they usually left through the garage anyway. I went over, slid the lock into place, and went back to my room. It was around 1 or 2 p.m. After finishing my cereal, I got right back to gaming. I had just reopened my game and loaded into a new match when I felt something shake my desk. I didn't hear anything because I had my headset on, but it felt like a vibration, something I'd usually only feel when my parents closed the door downstairs. I took my headset off, turned toward the bedroom door, and listened for any sound. It was quiet. I got up, opened the door, and looked down the hallway toward the stairs. Again, I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe it was the heater turning on, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, especially after finding the door unlocked earlier. I walked over to the stairs. Just as I reached the top and looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze. A second later, the shadow stopped moving too, as if whoever it was had noticed me. My heart pounded as I stood motionless, feeling like time had stopped. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow moved again. I could faintly hear footsteps walking toward the back of the house, followed by the quiet sound of the back door opening and closing. Then, silence. I ran to my parents' bedroom, locked the door, and used the home phone to call 911. The police arrived within a few minutes. What they found only made the situation more disturbing. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant the intruder may have picked the lock of the front door. However, the door was locked when the police arrived, suggesting they had relocked it after entering. That means the intruder must have entered the house sometime during the 3 or 4 hours I was gaming. I can't stop thinking about the knocks I heard right after my parents left. It's possible that was them testing to see if anyone was home. Even more chilling, they were likely in the house while I was downstairs making my bowl of cereal. They could have been hiding in another room, watching me the entire time. We'll never know what their intentions were, but since that day, I've never truly felt safe in my own home. I worked at a gas station for 2 years, starting in 2015. During the winter of my first year, I had a regular customer who came in often. I worked night shifts, so whenever someone came in more than once, I would usually recognize them. This guy was a trucker who told me his name was Paul. He was a really nice guy, though there was definitely something a little different about him. He was always smiling, too smiley and happy, especially for the middle of the night. Sometimes, I actually found it creepy. One night, he came in acting differently. He greeted me when he walked in, but as he looked around the aisles, his face seemed dull and almost angry. He picked up an energy drink and came to the counter, and suddenly, his face changed back to that overly happy expression. I could see dread in his eyes though, which made his smile seem even more fake, almost disturbing in a way. He paid, walked out to his truck, and drove off. I had almost forgotten about it until the next day when I saw his truck pull into the lot again. It was cold and snowy outside when Paul came in. He had that same look as yesterday, except this time, he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink off the shelf and came to the counter. As he paid, he started asking me questions, like how busy it was that night and when my shift ended. Before he left, he asked if I wouldn't mind helping him lift something in his truck. Having known him for so long now, I agreed, wanting to be helpful. I put on my jacket and followed him outside. The gas station was empty, aside from his truck, which was parked on the far side of the lot. I followed him over to the truck. He opened the passenger door, then walked around to the driver's side and got in. "It's right up here," he said, gesturing for me to get in as well. I climbed up and sat down. It was one of those big box trucks with a door behind the seats that led to the cargo section. I looked at Paul. He had that strange wide smile again. "It's just right in there. I'll follow behind you," he said, pointing at the door. I suddenly felt very unsettled and could sense that something wasn't right. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to say or do, I began to notice an odor. It was strong and disgusting, coming from whatever was behind that door. I looked back up at Paul. His face was tense, but he still held that unnerving smile, watching me and waiting for me to move. Without saying a word, I jumped out of the truck, slamming the door behind me, and hurried back into the station. He didn't follow me. As I was rushing back, I thought I heard him yell, like a frustrated scream, coming from the truck, but the wind muffled most of the sound. He pulled out of the gas station soon after. I worked there for another year, but Paul never showed up again, not even once. I don't know what was back there or what was really going on with Paul, but I think I was lucky not to find out. I was taking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. I knew driving such a long distance during winter was probably not a great idea, but I couldn't find anyone to watch my dog Frankie, so I had to bring him with me. Frankie is just a little wiener dog, and I thought he'd be terrified of flying, so I decided to drive instead. The first half of the trip went well without any issues, great weather, easy driving, and no problems. However, on the morning of the second leg of the drive, I woke up to a heavy snowfall. I packed up quickly and tried to outrun the weather, but it only seemed to get worse. Halfway there, I realized the trip was taking too long, and I wouldn't make it to my destination by the end of the night. So, I decided to find a motel to stay at instead. The road I was on was pretty empty. There wasn't much around, aside from the occasional gas station every 50 miles or so. When I finally saw a sign for a motel, I immediately pulled off the road and into the parking lot. It was an old, rundown building, and most of the lights were off. However, there was another car parked there, so I figured there had to be a worker inside. I left the car running for Frankie as I got out and walked through the blizzard toward the main entrance. The door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog off the window and pressed my face against the glass, trying to see inside. It looked dark and deserted. I wasn't sure what to think, but I didn't have much time to process before I heard Frankie barking. I turned around and saw two men walking past my car and toward me. The way they walked made it clear something wasn't right. I tried to start walking back to my car and ignore them, but they cut me off. "Hey, is this place open?" one of them asked. No. I think it's closed tonight." "Sorry," I said, trying to walk around them. "Do you think you could help us? We're having some car trouble. Maybe you could spare some gas." It was obvious they were grasping at any excuse to keep talking to me. I said no and tried to back away, making a wide detour around them, but even then, they still tried to get in front of me. I hurried back to my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got in and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I couldn't blame him. This was really uncomfortable and kind of terrifying, since we were so far out on a deserted road. One of them repeatedly knocked on my window, still asking for help. It was so obvious they didn't need any. This was some kind of trap, or worse. Before anything could escalate, I backed up and drove out onto the main road. After giving it some thought, I ended up dialing 911 to report their strange behavior. About 20 minutes later, I got a call back from an officer saying the men were no longer at the parking lot, and neither was their car. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked well enough for them to leave, and they apparently left right after I did. What horrifies me most isn't the brief interaction I had with them, but the thought of what they were potentially trying to do. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found.